To set the stage, so you know, when we filed the bankruptcy petition, we filed, the usual stuff that you file, but also on the same, within a couple of days after filing it, we filed a lawsuit in the bankruptcy against the NHL, contending that their efforts to stop the move of the team violated U.S. antitrust laws. And so the dispute that Susan was talking about was, we said, look, we believe that the restrictions, because we acknowledged that the contracts that we had with the NHL limited this, and you can only play in Arizona, and we needed their consent. We acknowledged that. We said, however, we believe that those restrictions violate antitrust law. And so as a result of it, when we filed the lawsuit against the NHL, and so we said, look, and it wasn't a one-pager, it was a lengthy lawsuit, and so to set up the dispute that Susan was referring to.
One kind of interesting aside to the Ninth Circuit decision, there's two decisions in the Raiders case. Raiders 1, which came out in 1984, and I think stunned the NFL. And before the legal proceedings occurred, as I mentioned, the Baltimore Colts made the midnight move to Indianapolis. And the then San Diego Clippers, without any notice to the NBA, became the Los Angeles Clippers. And there was actually litigation that started about that, but did not get taken particularly far.
Right. Speaking to what she said a little bit earlier about some of these creditors that were out there kind of waiting to see what was going to happen in the case. Two of them, as you said before, one, Mr. Moyes, the owner, one of the other guys was the great one, Wayne Gretzky. What role did he play in this bankruptcy proceeding?
Well, you got an attorney, but you never saw Wayne Gretzky. I think he kind of wanted to distance himself from the situation. He was the Coyotes coach and minority owner when all this happened. But I think, I don't think he ever came into the court.
He was owed a lot of money. He was owed a lot of money, but he actually never came into court. Bussler came in, Betten came in, Moyes came in, but Gretzky never showed up.
I did find it a little ironic because he's, at least to my knowledge of hockey, kind of the greatest hockey player of all time. And here's the NHL throughout the case, kind of every chance they get, kind of kicking him in the shin.
Yeah.
You're kind of going, hey, it's Wayne Gretzky, come on.
I mean, it's true because when the NHL finally bought the team, when they actually bought the team, they talked about which contracts they wanted to take with it. So, the concessions for people that sell hot dogs, that sort of thing. They had this whole list, and notably absent from that, in fact, was on a list of stuff they definitely didn't want, was the Great One's contract.
Right, he was a disfavorable creditor. Was that what it was termed? Or?
Well, one of the things, the reason why Judge Baum turned down the NHL's initial effort to buy the team was that the NHL said, we like these creditors and we'll make sure they get paid, and we don't like these creditors and we won't let them get paid. And the ones who were disfavored, as you were saying, were mostly Gretzky and Moyes. And in bankruptcy, you've got obligations to treat all creditors fairly and in accordance with the priorities in the Bankruptcy Code, and you can't just pick and choose which creditors you're going to take and which creditors you're going to favor. Because of that, Judge Baum turned down the initial effort by the NHL to acquire the team, and they had to in turn back down as to how they would treat them.
Yeah, it certainly seems some of the bids that came in from Mr. Basile, who was the only bidder for a long time.
Yes.
No, actually, the only bidder.
Ever.
And despite there was a bifurcated process, right, where they wanted even local bidders, people that were exclusively going to keep the team in Arizona, and then going to have, or that was shot down?
That was shot down.
Well, actually, no, it was allowed.
But nobody came in to buy it.
There's nobody else who's ever said, I want to buy this team since this started.
When you're losing $30 million a year, anybody who has the brains and the economic wherewithal to buy a team, to have the money to buy a team, doesn't usually want to lose that much. I remember talking to Jerry Moyes at one time. He said, a few million a year loss, that's a great tax write-off. 30.
Right.
I mean, it's interesting because during the early parts of the case, when the NHL was arguing, they wanted this bifurcated process. They said, the very first thing, Judge, is let's just have an auction for just people who want to keep it in Arizona. And then if we don't get a good result there, then we'll open it up to someone, who would take it out. Now think of the timing. Filed this case early May. The NHL draft was end of June-ish, and the season was going to start essentially October 1. So, they knew that if they had gotten this bifurcated process down, by the time you got through the let's keep it in Arizona sale, that there really would be no possibility. You can't move it in the middle of a season. And so they did push for that, but what you did, as I understood it, Judge, and I understood very little, obviously, in the case, but as I did understand it, you said, we're going to have let's have offers come in, and we'll see what we have. The NHL would numerous times, they said, we have 4 or 5 buyers that will buy this team, keep it in Arizona, and pay all legitimate creditors. That was their phrase, all legitimate creditors, which really meant everyone except Jerry Moyes and Wayne Gretzky, for all practical purposes.
Well, there might have been a lawyer there, too.
Oh, that would be sacrilege. You always pay lawyers. But that having been said, so that was what happened. And as we got to the deadline, and it was a hard deadline that we had to meet, I did get a call from a lawyer for the NHL, and they said, well, we're making history here. We're making an offer to buy an NHL team. The NHL has never bought a team before. Major League Baseball has done that, the Expos. The NBA has done that, but the National Hockey League never did. And so they actually made the offer to buy the team, and it was set up because they didn't want to go into an auction hearing where the only offer was this offer to move it, and knowing that you're losing, $30 to $50 million a year to keep it here.
And Basile had some pretty high bids and a lot of incentives, especially with some cash bonuses toward the end there. It seemed like he was kind of riding in with the white cape, but the way they kind of kicked him out, was there something specific about him? There must have been.
Well, I think it was really the move.
Right.
I think if he said, I want to buy this team and keep it in Phoenix and give me 4 years, if I can't turn around, then I'll apply to move it. They might have gone for that. The city of Glendale would have objected to that, but the league might have gone off on that. I have to tell you one thing that was really interesting. Is you get these massive briefs and affidavits from everybody. And it was like, reading an encyclopedia every day. But I get this one, and this is the NHL's expert. And I'm reading it, and there's an article they're quoting from in there. In the beginning of the article, apropos to what Susan said about the losses, it starts out and it says, how to make a small fortune by owning a professional sports franchise. The next line is, start with a large fortune and buy an NHL franchise. And that was the NHL's expert.
Very interesting. So, is there anything that, moving forward from here, now well into a season we've just started, Coyotes are kind of off to a bad start. What can we expect kind of moving forward? What's the sale process like right now, and where do we go?
I think it's, at least from the public reports, it's kind of scary, I think, for the city of Glendale, and if you're a hockey fan in Arizona, for Arizona hockey fans. The city, the last 2 years, each year, has paid the National Hockey League $25 million before the season starts, is to be used to cover operating losses. And I have to back up a little bit and talk about when we got to the day of the auction in early September of 2009. I may be off a little bit on the numbers, but I think Mr. Balsillie offered the city of Glendale $50 million in cash to consent to the sale to him. Now,
that was outside. That was in addition to whatever they
that
were
was
getting
in
out.
addition to buying the team.
Yeah, that
we
was
offered.
that was his
with that
original
money,
offer.
they could have paid off their damn bonds.
That was his original offer plus $50 million cash for the city. And to put that in perspective, the city had to issue bonds for $180 million to build that arena. And as I mentioned, they've now had to put up $50 million more to keep the team here for the last 2 seasons. As an old bankruptcy lawyer, I think, if I remember correctly at the time, I kind of looked at the city's attorney and said something like, would you like a recess to talk to your client for a couple of minutes? Got her immediate, no, Judge, we're not interested.
I mean, the city was in an interesting, untenable position in the sense that they were taking the position that legally we could not get out of that lease, which became an academic issue because they ultimately consented to the NHL sale, and you recall that there was that discussion between you, Judge, and City Attorney, where you were saying, okay, so you understand that if the sale goes to the NHL, because the NHL's offer was we will buy it, we will keep it here one season and try and find a buyer to keep it in Arizona. If we can't, we are going to reserve the right to move it. And so the judge kept saying to the attorney, well, you're consenting to the sale, so you understand that it's conceivable that the team can move. And there was a lot of going back and forth, but ultimately they had to say, yes, we support the sale. The ironic part to me is that while everyone during the course of the case said, well, the only reason this team has lost money was because of bad management. I mean, just horrible management. Because with competent management, we can print money for this team. Of course, the NHL has now had it going on its third season. As I said, they lost $36 million their first year. They lost $35 million their second, so it's getting better. We're seeing a positive trend. And they're clearly on track to lose, $30+ million. And again, this is EBITDA. This isn't any sort of fancy tax losses. This is real money. I mean, real money. It's the old thing on Catch-22 that you lose a nickel on every sale, but you make it up on volume. There comes a point here where, I think it's going to be extremely difficult to find a buyer. As an Arizona native,
for the last 3 years.
I hope they do find one.
What? Oh, I was just saying, no one showed up for the last 3 years. There.
Right, and sort of toward the end of that sale, going back to Vasily again, what not a lot of people may have read in the record, and I wonder how really persuasive it was. Vasily was quite an unpopular guy within the NHL, and before, I think maybe right around the time of the sale, the Board of Governors met to approve whether he was able to actually buy, and I think it was unanimous, we just decided outside, 29-0 voted that no, he was unable to or unfit to own a NHL team.
That he was unfit. I was
was
actually at that
another first,
NHL board
That was
meeting.
another first.
Yeah.
That was another first, Kellen, by the way. No one's ever been.
So Susan, have they had any other character owners in the NHL, to your knowledge?
Nope. None before. This is a guy who is a noted philanthropist, an excellent businessman, Time Man of the Year. I mean, and yet he's not qualified to own a team, and the reason was that he didn't play by the NHL rules in their view. Bottom line.
Anything specific?
He's trying to go through the back door of a bankruptcy to acquire this team.
Just curious, it sounds like you're talking about a Mark Cuban who wants to buy.
Well, and that's
Wants to buy the Chicago Cubs at the time or whatever, and I'm an internet guy, so Mark Cuban to me is awesome, and I'm happy he's going to win an NBA trophy that's not going to be given out for at least a couple of years in my mind. And he's stuck with everybody winning the last one, but baseball says we don't want you in baseball because you're.
And you're exactly right. And one of the things that's really interesting is that in the Rangers bankruptcy case, the judge there, following up on what Judge Baum did here, said, we're going to exercise good faith and fair dealing in making a decision, and we're going to have an auction. And he made very clear on the record that if you, MLB, turn down Mark Cuban after he wins this, then you better have a really good reason. You better have a way of showing that you were in fact exercising good faith and fair dealing in turning him down. Mark didn't win, so they didn't have to get there. But I think it's coming up in the Dodgers. It's going to be the same thing. I mean, as I understand it, Cuban's interested in bidding again.
And Cuban could write a check for any team he wants. So.
Probably the whole league.
Yeah.
But yeah, Mark Cuban and the Nolan Ryan group got into a very heavy, late into the night auction for the Texas Rangers. What was that in 2010?
2010, I think.
Here's what I think is, I'm sorry, Mike.
Well, I think I've talked with Mark Cuban's lawyer about that auction, and at least his impression was that it went so long because the successful group, Nolan Ryan and Hank Greenberg, it was very difficult for them to raise their bid. So Cuban would make the high bid, and then there would have to be a recess for about 30 minutes. And he was fairly sure they were literally out in the hall on their phone calling their money people saying, I need another $15 million. Can you cover me for another bid? Okay, Akin makes a bid. Cuban would immediately raise it by $10 million. This went on, I think, for about 6 or 7 hours.
This issue of the approval process of the league is really, I think, if you had to look at the lesson that's being learned from, the Cubs is not really a good example because that was a big love fest. It was literally a 48-hour bankruptcy. That's not really an object lesson. But if you look at the Rangers, the Coyotes, and now the Dodgers, when you look at these cases where you're really seeing this stuff develop, I think ultimately the league control and the amount of and the approval process and things like that, outside of bankruptcy, mortals like us, we never see these decisions being made. There's a phone call, there's a meeting somewhere, things are done. Mere mortals never get to get in on that. But all of a sudden in a bankruptcy process, this becomes a very public process. And you can also question, within certain limits, you can question the real basis for it. Is it just, what I call the butthead factor? Okay, Mark Cuban's a butthead, we don't want him in the league. Okay, but that is what it is, but is that, when you're talking a difference of $100 million, maybe he's a butthead.
Bankruptcy's about
he's
paying
our
creditors.
butthead. He's the rich butthead. And so it is interesting, and in both the Coyotes case and the Dodgers case, the owners attempted to do discovery through the bankruptcy process to get behind some of this stuff. And both judges, the judge in the Dodgers case and Judge Baum, were hesitant. They said, we can't make this a sideshow where you're essentially putting the league on trial. We're gonna go and take depositions of the owner of the Maple Leafs, for example, or you get to go and get into Bud Selig's dealing with the other 29 teams, and so they restricted that. But the reason I would suggest that it's really interesting is because if you look at after this 29-0 vote, where Balsillie was rejected, and that happened in, say, August of 2009. So there's this unanimous vote. They stand up and say, Judge was unanimously rejected, and he's a bad guy. We don't like him on character and integrity grounds. And if the guy was a lawyer, that I could understand. But he wasn't. But in any event, there was and this case got a lot of press in Canada, as you can imagine, because it's their life up there. And so when you read the Canadian press reports and you read the U.S. press reports, you get very different sort of views on it. The courtrooms were always packed. In fact, the judge had set up a separate courtroom where there was a TV so they could monitor the proceedings as they were going on, and everyone who was online and all these reporters would be sending, like bulletins from the front. Someone just said this and someone just said that. But here's what was reported in the Globe Sports, Canadian newspaper, and this was in November. So remember, the sale closed very beginning of November of 2009. And I'll just quote, it's in the materials, but it's just interesting. It says, Bettman already took a shot across the bow this week from Kevin Compton, a Silicon Valley venture capitalist and co-owner of the San Jose Sharks. Compton told the Sports Business Daily the whole Coyote saga was, quote, a joke, end quote, and the league needs Balsillie as an owner. Quote, Jim loves hockey, end quote, Compton said. Quote, Jim's got a lot of money. Jim's got a lot of passion, end quote. Compton also said he is certain Balsillie will become an NHL owner one day. Here's the interesting point. When it was pointed out the league is keeping Balsillie out, Compton shot back that, quote, owners aren't, end quote. Which leads to an interesting thing. So there was this 29-0, and here you have one of the owners saying, oh, it's the league keeping him out. So either he missed the vote, and I hate when that happens, or there's more going on there than meets the eye. But again, everyone's operating under extreme time pressures, and the judges are hesitant to make this, let's make it an indictment against the league, so they restrict discovery. But I thought, absent this settlement that was just announced in the Dodgers case, I think we would have seen some interesting stuff come in. A lot of dirty laundry being aired on all sides. McCourt's no angel. He's no angel. But we would have seen a lot of interesting dirty laundry aired, and it'd be fun just to watch. But then, that's just me.